Greetings, everybody. This is Clint McKinley, and I'm here with my business partner and friend, Scott Halverson. Hi, Scott.
Hey Clint, how you doing?
Great, good to see you. Today, we will be kicking off our very first podcast for Halverson and McKinley. There's something about the podcast format that Scott and I have been discussing, and we both like. It's one thing to read a headline. It's something else to read an article. Quite something else to read a book. But the podcast format is a format where you can really dive into an issue and look at it calmly from several angles and allow the best points of view to come forth and to have a good discussion about the topic at hand while keeping emotions under control, not trying to win someone over with a quick headline that can be beguiling in its real meaning, but to have an actual conversation about topics in business that we find interesting. And Scott, you and I have been discussing doing something like this for a few months. And, what kind of a podcast would you and I do in the world of podcasts? And ultimately, as growth advisors, as advisors who in our consulting practice, we are working to help companies grow. This word growth is something that we think about a lot, right? And
Yeah,
Scott, what was it? A week or two ago, we were talking about the mindset of growth as much as the mechanics and the numbers of growth. And this is what took us to this point.
yeah, and I think the reality is we've been helping consultants in the direct selling industry. We've been talking with other clients outside of that, and growth is like always something everyone needs. But then it's like, okay, so how do you really get to it, and what's the discipline involved? And even more than that, it's like, how do you deal with the times when it feels like you're not even making any progress? And so we're like, why don't we just talk about that? Because I don't know about you, I've experienced every single one of those emotions, and not just like one time but multiple times, and somehow we're still here. I'm in New York, you're in LA, and we can make this happen, so I'm excited for it.
Yes, we can make it happen. And thank you for joining me, Scott. So we're going to dive into it today, and we're going to talk about the mindset of growth. One thing that Scott and I have heard a lot of people say over our careers in business is this phrase, get out of your comfort zone. Get out of your comfort zone. Embrace discomfort. Do what doesn't feel good. And that will help you grow. And, I was pondering that the other day and I was thinking to myself, well, what if I always stepped out of my comfort zone? What if I was constantly living in a never ending state of discomfort? How content would my life
Yep.
be? And I think you can take anything to an extreme. And I think that, most of us desire at the end of the day, right, Scott, a comfortable life. And it doesn't mean that it's easy every day, but the ideal of the life that we're going for is not where we're stepping over uncomfortable landmines every single moment of the day. But the flip side of that is if you want to grow, if you actually want to grow in your business or you want to grow as a person in your life, growth comes with pain. It comes with some failure. I had a mentor, Scott, tell me one time that success gives us confidence and failure gives us growth. And I've been calling this the growth success paradox ever since, because I think we want both, right? We want to be confident and we want to grow. But if you really stop and think about it, when you're winning in life or when you're winning in business or when the cookie is crumbling in a way that pleases you, it seems that we feel really good. The reward is we feel great, right? We start an initiative because we want to succeed, not because we want to fail. So when things are going well, we feel good and we get confident. But what we're not doing is growing and learning. The growth and the learning comes from the failing. Scott, today I was reading some of the list of the most strikeouts in Major League Baseball history. And I looked at the top 25 most strikeouts, and there were about half of them were in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah,
People
for
like
sure.
people like Derek Jeter, people like Reggie Jackson, people like Ken Griffey Jr., who many was called the greatest hitter of the steroid era, the best clean hitter. Um, Jim Tomei. So many great baseball players lead the majors all time in strikeouts. And when Babe Ruth was playing, he was leading the majors in strikeouts, and he reshaped the game of baseball. So I posit that these strikeouts from these great baseball hitters had a lot to do with their growth and their learning about the strike zone, about their swing playing, about how to read pitches as they're coming in. It's when we're failing and things aren't working that we are in a prime mode to receive growth, to learn, and to be able to apply those things to be able to win more often. So, Scott, as I think about this paradox of growth and success, everybody wants to succeed, but in order to succeed, you need to grow. And the way that you grow is through not succeeding. What are your thoughts on this? What seems to be a paradox?
First of all, it sounds exhausting because it's just like how on earth can you like just muster up the courage and the fortitude every day to be like, I'm gonna step outside my comfort zone when like naturally we're like, I kind of like being in the comfort zone and I like being, just feel like I got a warm blanket around me. And yeah, you can pass a day that way, you can pass a couple of days that way. And then the next thing you know, a week is gone, 2 weeks are gone, a month is gone. You're like, I didn't even do anything. And that's to me when it gets hard. So I guess it's one of those things where it's a discipline that you have to learn, which is why it's a paradox, right? Because it's so unnatural in how we want to like act each day. But the other thing is like the sports analogy is fantastic and I love it. I just feel badly that you root for the wrong team all the time, but that's okay. We'll let that go. And he's a big Red Sox fan, and I love the fact that he is loyal and true blue to the Red Sox or true red. And I think it's still one of like the coolest places to go see a baseball game. That's on my bucket list. But think about even golf. Some of Tiger Woods' most amazing shots happened after one of his worst shots. And so like we only see the highlight, right? But then we never see like the one part where it's like, wait, he wasn't even close on a shot where he should have even been on the green. And then he pulls off this amazing thing. And my son, who had golf lessons, his teacher used to say, "You're only one shot away from turning the hole around, from turning your round around." And so it kind of goes in line with if you know you're going to fail, you also know that you're going to succeed. So why not just do something?
Yeah, be grateful for the totality of the experience. It's
Yep.
interesting. Pros and amateurs alike hit into sand traps. The difference is when I'm in a bunker, I'm nervous. When a pro is in a bunker, a pro is actually happy. It's like so much is more under their control. They're very good at the bunker shots. I'm not, and because they know that that one stroke that's going to get them back into the match is coming out of the sand, and I'm nervous of how many strokes it's going to take me to get onto the green from there. But yeah, they've been more accustomed to it. So interesting
Well,
thoughts.
think about it. It's
Yeah.
hours and hours and thousands of balls that they've practiced and hit to feel comfortable. So, like the same application works for us when it comes to growing our business, to prospecting, to following up, to closing. It's like it just doesn't happen overnight. So, yeah, especially at the beginning, you're going to fail. There's no doubt.
Yeah, you're gonna
So,
fail.
deal
So,
with it.
and failure is not a dirty word, everybody. Uh,
No.
to be human is to err. To be human is to fail. To be an enlightened human is to learn from those experiences and to try to minimize them in the future. But when they do happen again, or when another failure comes along and we wind up in a sand trap or whatever the case may be, to get enough swings in that we know how to manage it. Because ultimately, growth and confidence combine paradoxical pathways to reach intelligence and wisdom. And we've got to create space in our souls for both of these things, for growth and for confidence, the growth through failure and the confidence through winning. Because I guess if I could summarize this, Scott, from my perspective, a commitment to growth includes acceptance of attendant failure and their lessons. And that's true in life. It's also true in a business. If you are a CEO running a business, if you are in a position of leadership in a sales organization, and you want to grow, which almost everybody in those roles does. The place to get yourself in your mind is to understand that this pathway is going to include moments when we fall down. The last analogy I'll use is the analogy of babies. I know, Scott, you've had some children, and now you have children who are getting married, and I have a child who is now married, and we both have probably grandbabies in our future. Thinking back to when our children were born, right? Well, hopefully they got to get going. We think back to when we were raising babies, and babies become toddlers and they start to crawl, and then pretty soon there's this like indomitable force inside of this toddler to walk. Like they're watching everybody else walk, and there's something very strong evolutionarily going on in the brain that is saying, you need to walk, pal. So they get up and they try to walk. Bam, bam, bam. How many shiners and bonks and head knocks did and stitches and big bumps on the head did we see our kids go through? But under no conditions when that happened did the toddler say, "That's it. You know what? I'm not a walker. I'm just not a walker. Clearly, I can't do it. Walking isn't for me. I'm going to be one of the crawling humans." Said no kid ever. Thought no kid
Right,
ever. They just
right.
get up and keep going and they figure it out. And you see this with bear cubs and their mamas walking around. The cubs are falling down cliffs and getting back up. And at no point do you think, I'm done, not going to walk. And growth in your company, growth in your life is akin to growth in an infant who can crawl and who can walk. And they don't think the sky is falling because they fell over. In fact, they're more excited to learn from that failure of falling down and getting back up. So if we can embrace the totality of life and being a human being, we will embrace the fact that we will indeed fail. And when that comes, we can prime ourselves to grow, which we know we need to be successful. So, Scott, can
It's
you
like
think
that
of any?
idea of it's like that
Go
idea of
ahead.
fail fast or fail forward, right? And I hear people say it all the time, and you can dismiss it like pretty quickly because, you know, I've been in situations where failure was like not an option. And usually it's in business where they're like, we got to hit these numbers. We got to hit it this week. We got to hit it this month. And so it's hard to really figure out. It's like, yeah, but we need to try some things. And yes, we're not gonna hit the target. But I think if we take that analogy in business and just like it's fail fast, but then always be able to put into action something else and learn from what that failure was. I think it has to do a lot with leadership qualities in looking at the bigger picture. Like, are you in a turnaround situation? Are you in a hyper growth situation? Are you trying to maintain your market share? And so all of a sudden, the idea of failing becomes a very different definition. But the reality is if you don't give your teams the opportunity to try some things out, they're never going to step out of the comfort zone. And you're left alone at the top, and they're going to look to you for every single answer, every single solution, because they're too afraid to step out of the comfort zone and try. That's simple.
Yeah, they're afraid of the negative emotions that may come from failure. When you talk about trying new things, Scott, if we're not going to hit the numbers, we're going to try something else. Um, the tolerance for risk here becomes important
Yep.
because we need to be able to take some risks. You need to. Every time you're a manager, you send a baseball player to the plate, he might get out, he might get on base, something's going to happen. You don't know. And in baseball, if you get a hit 3 times out of 10, you can make a lot of money. And in business, I like to think that the golden ratio is maybe more like 60 or 70% of your decisions have got to be more or less good. That leads to 30 or 40 that are not.
Yep.
And you're going to play with risk right there. You're going to take some risks, some of which will propel your business forward, others will not. But if there's no tolerance for risk, we're never going to be able to fail enough to know what does work. I think about SpaceX and how Elon knew that in order to land rockets, which is the whole the beginning and the end of what we need to figure out how to do if we're gonna be able to do interplanetary travel, we have to be able to land rockets or it's too expensive. He knew he'd have to blow up a lot of rockets. And if you put a search on it on YouTube, you're going to find plenty of beautiful images of rockets going up and then boom, they explode, they go backward, they have a problem, they don't land right. And through that trial and error, that SpaceX is now more or less perfected landing rockets, which definitely opens up the door to exploring Mars and other planets. So that risk tolerance and taking those chances is something that we've got to do. Well, there's so many ways that we can talk about this with business examples, but let's get to maybe some from our own experience, Scott.
Okay.
Either in the consulting practice or in your life. Give us some examples of the growth that you've received from failure or the confidence that you've received from success, and kind of how you've been able to balance that from the life of Scott.
It's such a thing. It's like, okay, we've got to admit it, right? And we've got to think about it. And I guess I could, you could cherry pick some examples for sure, but I think I'm just gonna go back to a couple that were like super meaningful to me. And I'll start with one that's of the personal nature, but because of that, moving forward, like for me, isn't really a problem. And I got into triathlons in like 2016. And it was at the request of the CEO of a company that we both worked with. It was like, hey, let's do this, let's try this. And like, I knew nothing about it. And you know, like got a bike. Okay, wrong bike for the sport, but that's okay. You know, we figure it out. And it's like, oh, the running part? No, 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 running's hard. The one thing that I underestimated was swimming.
So I hired a coach, and I fought this coach all the time in order to learn how to swim properly, so that when I'm swimming long distances that take 30, 40 minutes, an hour, I'm not going to drown, which is my greatest fear. And the thing she said was like, I need you to sit on the bottom of the pool and hold your breath for as long as you can and just relax. And it took me the better part of a month to even get that down, because I just fought it the whole way. And until I
So wait a
learned how to,
second. So you told her you're afraid of drowning, and she said the way you're going to deal with this is to sit at the bottom of the pool
yeah,
for
and
as
drown.
long as you can. Yeah.
Yeah. So mind you, like the pool is 4.5 feet deep. So the probability of drowning is absolutely at its lowest, right? And so it was all up here in my mind in how to make that work. Once I figured that out and I tried, and then it got longer and longer and longer, all of a sudden the swim became very relaxing to me, and my heart rate never spiked. It's still that way today. If I'm like stressed, I will go swim for like 20, 30, 40 minutes, and it is like the most calming thing in the world. So it just kind of helped me in that process. And then I applied each one of those principles to the bike, getting better. What am I doing wrong? How do I improve? What's the nutrition like? And I'm going to tell you, like, my first triathlon was a total failure. Like, I did, I was so worried about it that, like, I overcompensated for everything. And just like, I found myself swimming out into the middle of the ocean on the swim, and some dude on a surfboard had to knock me back the right direction. Like, it was just so stupid. Bike, I got a cramp in my legs, which sounds crazy because that would never happen today. And running was just like survival mode, and it was like the shortest distance ever. And so, like, at the end of the day, it's like, okay, I had a lot of growth that I needed to experience because I'd never done it before. But what the cool part is I apply every single one of those principles to work, to family, to relationships today. It's like, yeah, you're probably not going to be great at this particular skill set today, but I'm going to get better, and I'm going to try, and I'm going to learn from every little failure. So I don't mind failing today, whereas 15, 20 years ago, it would have been just devastating.
Well, you've developed some curiosity. And if there's a balm that can be applied to the fear of failure, it just might be curiosity. Being curious enough to know to say to yourself, I wonder what I can learn about a triathlon. I wonder how I can get over. I wonder what's on the other side of the fear for me of drowning. If there's a life I can enjoy swimming and I can be around water with more, safety and enthusiasm and confidence. So congratulations on confronting your fear of drowning, which is probably a pretty common fear. And for those watching who are afraid of drowning, Scott sat at the bottom of the pool to deal with that. And then
Exactly.
eventually you followed your coach, which is great.
All right, your
One of
turn to
the
be vulnerable.
well, when I was a young man, I spent one summer selling door to door in Texas, and which is something that my son Ethan has now done for 4 summers, making way more money than I made back in the day. Congratulations to Ethan. But for
Nice.
me, I was out there slugging it out in the Texas heat, and I wasn't having much success. I was in a neighborhood that was a wealthy neighborhood, and I was a little bit intimidated by these palatial mansions. And when I would knock on the doors, I would typically get, a member of their staff would answer the door rather than a member of their family. And I remember thinking, why do I keep failing? How come I can't get through? And I was trying to make connections to the neighborhood, and I was a tryhard, to use a Gen Z term, trying to figure it out. I eventually just said, shut up, Clint, and be yourself, and stop worrying about the call going wrong, and just be who you are and see what happens. And so I knocked on this next door, and this man walked out wearing this nice shirt. He looked super confident. Guy had to be rich, right? Living in this huge house. His name is Larry Kalis. So, Larry, if you're watching, hello. And Larry Kalis is an oil executive living in Westover Hills, which is a fancy pants neighborhood in Fort Worth. And he invited me into his home, and I met his lovely wife and their children. And he said, "Show us what you got, Clint." So I took the study guides out of my bag that I was selling, and had a great experience with that family. And Larry and his wife wound up buying the whole set that I had. He also asked if he could write a letter to my parents.
Wow.
He asked for my home address back in Connecticut, where both Scott and I were raised, incidentally. And he wrote my parents a letter to talk about the experience of me knocking on his door and ultimately selling the study guides to him and his family. And man, I felt so worthless when I was knocking on his door. I felt like I sucked. Like, what's my problem? Why can't I get into any of these houses? And I just trying to learn. I was humble enough in that moment, not in every moment of my life where I failed, but in that moment I was to learn, what can I improve and what's the learning here. And the learning was just to show up authentically as myself. And some people are going to dig it, and some people are not. But if I knock on enough doors, I'm going to be okay. And Larry Kalis is the one who really brought me into the fruition of belief on that one. And I'll never forget him as long as I live. It was at a time in my life where I needed a win badly. I had had a lot of failure, but I had finally committed myself to growing from it rather than just not enjoying it, just calling it sucky and terrible. Instead of that, you just say, what's the jewel here in the middle of this, and what am I going to learn? And to show up as myself, to not try to be someone I wasn't, and to just try to communicate with another human being openly and directly was the trick. And then Larry Kill said, come on in. And we learned from there. There are other
That's
examples for
amazing.
both of us, Scott, that I think I can imagine. I know even in our professional lives, you as president of Longaberger Company, as an executive at Jafra Cosmetics, Rodan and Fields, Mary Kay, you've certainly been with some blue chip brands, and along the way have had many opportunities to grow and to learn. And as you stepped into your president role, just wondering how this sort of fear of failure slash acceptance of it being part of the risk taking process, so you can learn and then start winning more and enjoying the confidence of that. Is there anything you can share with us out of that time of your life in the executive roles you've been in?
Yeah, I think there are like just a couple things. It like Longaberger was interesting because we were trying some new technology out, a new business model that was, live stream shopping. And like the first show was really successful because there was a lot of effort put behind it. And then, as maybe certain months came along, or the product was like new products weren't quite as exciting or weren't surrounded by maybe a holiday, some of the shows weren't as successful. And then we're like, well, why didn't we grow? Why didn't we do something different? And we started to analyze like every little piece of pre-show, during the show, post-show, to get the playbook down, to get it really good. And we had like, I was really impressed with the overall leadership of the company and those to whom I reported. It was like, they're like, we're just learning. Like over the course of this next year, we're just trying to figure out what works really well. And so like their leadership allowed that failure on some of those shows to happen. And then we got really dialed in. That was good. I remember also a time at Rodan and Fields where like the enrollment of new sponsors seemed to be about as predictable as the sun coming up every month. And we tried, there was a leader that said, I want to try something and I want to do like this national call, and I want to let people know about the opportunity. And so we had we had said, okay, if people sign up with this, they'll get a free regimen. Kind of what we did on the live, like in-person meetings. And all of a sudden, like other leaders started to hear about it. And they're like, I want in on that. Like, I want to do that. I want to do that. And so what I thought was kind of this closed group dynamic all of a sudden became this company problem. And I remember to the day, like after all was said and done, uh, there were so many people that signed up, and I got just basically berated because of the cost of the free regimens, and I felt like a total like failure at the time. And the funny thing was, is it created an inflection point with the business where all of a sudden the enrollments were 3 to 4 times more than they were in a typical month, and they never went back down. And so it was only until like after a few months did we see that, but I had to endure the heat of that quote failure, because it wasn't in line with the original strategy. So sometimes you try things out, and sometimes good things happen from it, but it still was like, a failure because it was outside of really the strategy of what wanted to happen. But that's one of those where I've not apologized for to this day.
Well, I remember you getting your butt whooped after that a little bit.
Yeah,
And I
it
remember
was
thinking,
fun.
better him than me. No, I'm teasing. But we had a tough CEO who wanted us to grow, which
Yep.
meant that she allowed us to fail and pick up the pieces. And then who knew you had discovered a new way that was going to propel the business forward in the end. Uh, Thanks for sharing that. Scott, as I think back on the things I've learned in more executive positions, at Ruby Ribbon, I had a great board of directors. They were so wise. Just imagine having a board of directors with Lori Bush and Connie Tang. Okay, and then
Wow.
on top of
Power
on top
power
of that,
duo right there.
right? And then I had two eminent venture capitalists, Cynthia Ringo, whose firm funded Tesla and SpaceX and almost all of Elon's projects, and Jennifer Trespack, who we called JT, who was the at the time leading the board. And my first 2 years in the position running the business, we had great years. I was feeling pretty confident. I probably wasn't learning very much, but I could fool myself into saying I was learning a lot. But in the old fashioned way of learning by falling down, I wasn't learning that way. And I had a lot of wind at my back. And when you have a wind at your back, it can lull you into a sense of security, like a lullaby, just lulling you into the sense that you're a winner. And then my third year as CEO was a lot harder. Things weren't working as well. We had adversity in the company, and I was scrambling to figure it out. And I wanted to show the board that I was competent, and I wanted to project leadership to the field that they would believe in. And I remember as we were thinking through a couple of potential solutions to a bit of a slowdown in the business after freshman and sophomore year feeling pretty good, year three was tough. And JT pulled me aside and said, Clint, you need to learn to go slow so that you can go fast.
Wow.
Take time to slow down. Don't tell the whole world you're slowing down, but in your mind, slow down the rate at which you're thinking. Start writing more, mapping out what you're saying to us, and make some sense of it before you show up to the next board meeting. Whew. Now, I had a string of about whatever 9 or 10 good board meetings in a row, so I was like, "Whoa, this is some humble pie for me." But in that moment, I realized I was going way too fast. I wasn't taking the time to slow down. I wasn't planning the next risk properly that I was going to take. And it took a very wise, experienced, seasoned board member to pull me aside and set my head right. And that didn't feel very good when it happened. Trust me. Having a board meeting where you feel like it didn't go as well as you wanted it to go is not a good way for a CEO to feel. However, I also knew that, okay, I'm getting an advanced level MBA class here, and I just need to be able to be humble enough to process what my board is telling me and admit some of the failures in my reasoning in the last 6 months. But you're eating that crow, you're eating the humble pie, and it doesn't feel good at all. You got to choke it down. It's like dry crackers, man. It doesn't feel good at all. But man, there's nutrients in there. and we were able to make some decisions to pivot our business. And Ruby Ribbon continues today to be a great company and a great business run by a great board and a new great CEO. Now that I am on to the next phase of my life, but it is interesting how these experiences of failing ourselves. Sometimes you've got to touch the hot stove yourself to learn. Sometimes you can watch somebody else touch it and get burned and say, that doesn't look like something I want to touch. But many of us who can be stubborn at times learn by touching the stove. We have an epic failure, or we have something that goes terribly wrong, and now we're heading into the laboratory. Now we're heading into the University of Hard Knocks and the MBA of experience. And so much of it is about how we think. So thank you for sharing your stories from Longaberger and Rodan and Fields. And that's
Oh,
one I can share with you there
thanks
from
for sharing
Ruby
yours.
Ribbon.
I think that's
Yeah.
great. So like my question to you is like, so okay, growth is necessary, right? And failure is part of it. And like, so like, why do we fear it so much? And then like, what are some of the primary benefits of growth through that process? You have any thoughts on that?
Sure. Thanks, Scott. One thing I picked up from meditation is that we have a very strange relationship with our emotions. I think this is why we fear failure as a human race. It is that the positive emotions tend to be desirable: joy, happiness, ecstasy, contentment. These are things that we want more of. And in a time of failure, you might be feeling frustrated. You might be feeling depressed. You're feeling pretty low. You're vibrating low. And what I have learned through some meditation coaches is that if we can change the nature of our relationship to our emotions and make them more third party, rather than becoming the emotion or embodying the emotion. Think about the difference between saying I feel anger versus I am angry.
Yeah,
Small shift, huge
totally
difference.
different
You
feel.
know,
Yeah.
just the analogy I use is I'm in my car driving along, and then I feel anger. That means anger just got in the back seat. And there might be a very good reason for there to be anger. Something might have happened where anger is appropriate. Anger is not always negative. It's a signal that we're getting that something isn't right. So I can look in my rear view mirror and I can see anger in my back seat with his Coke and his, just making himself comfortable, taking a little sip back there, stretching out his legs in my car. And I can say, hey, anger, I see you. I recognize you. But I'm talking to anger like it's a third party entity. I'm not letting it possess me and start to control my limbs and my mouth. It's just something that I notice it. It's along for the ride. And then I can relate to it in a healthy way because I'm relating to it with an arm's length, third party, transactional kind of approach to anger. And I'm able to be curious about the anger and ask the anger some questions. Why are you here? What's amiss? Let's work on this. Just changing your relationship to the emotion rather than becoming it or identifying as it, but just knowing that it's in your car. It's also a little bit like the weather. I call emotions like, it's emotional weather. If it's raining right now, if you and I are going to play golf and it's raining, we're probably going to be bummed out. Bummer, it's raining. And we're going to feel that disappointment. But what we're not going to think is it's going to rain every day for the rest of our lives and we're never going to play golf again. No, it's raining right now, which means
Yeah.
it will stop raining. But right now it's raining and I recognize that. And I'm just pointing it out that it's raining. I'm not becoming rain and crying rain and, thinking that it's never going to stop raining. And so when we think about fearing failure, I think one thing or one that's helped me, Scott, would be learning how to have a third party relationship with my emotions, learning how to welcome them in and shuttle them out, learning how to give them their due. Because if you blow off anger, it's not a good idea. I think you need to dive into the anger and find out what's going on there. And put your hard hat on and go into the web of emotions and have a conversation with it and figure out why am I triggered and why am I angry? And then you can unpack the work and be methodical about it rather than saying, I'm so angry. And then all of a sudden I'm punching a wall or saying something that I really regret. Those outcomes are terrible and we can avoid them by simply having that third party relationship. So that's something for me. How about you? I mean, in your life, Scott, if growth is necessary, why do we fear it? And how do you deal with this and with your
Yeah.
relationship with getting to the benefits of growth.
So it's interesting you said, like, you make it a third party relationship and it becomes that emotion, because you're either going to expend the effort into like dealing with that situation, or you're going to put effort into repairing what you've damaged. And I think it's so much easier like to do the former than the latter. And I think I'm going to like take a little bit of that into my own life. Listening to you say that in that way, I was like, wow, that's pretty deep, but it's also like really smart, and I think it's a great way to manage that. I um i tend to, like, for example, if I get upset about something, and my wife can attest to this, it's like I go into cleaning mode. Like I start expending energy into doing something that is productive. And when we lived in California, it was like, oh, he's cleaning the garage, like something's bothering him. And it's like, okay, that's one way of dealing with it. But then I started to like channel it into, okay, how can I just make a little bit of improvement into maybe what went wrong, what happened? And it really started when I heard the story about the British cycling team. And many have heard this about like 1% better every day. And,
Mm.
Dr. Dave Brailsford was the new coach for that team. It took them from like the cellar dwellers to Olympic champions in a very short amount of time. But they obsessed about the small things, just like incremental gains consistently over time. And like we know that it can lead to like 37 times improvement. That's like 3,700% improvement over the course of a year. And yeah, people have like tried to debunk that and all of this, like whatever. But the point of it is like the principle is still there. Just get a little better at, maybe you're wanting to learn how to talk to somebody and talk about your product, or talk about your company, or just your personal story, or what your vision is for the company if you're in a leadership position. And you just have to craft that. And the more you do that, the better you get. And I think we don't spend a lot of time in that area because we're too busy executing on so many other things that we need to stop and think about, wait, what's the one little thing that I can improve upon? And I've always felt like that continual curiosity, that continual, effort and like improvement, but like small increments, has helped me deal with those things. So that's just my approach.
Oh, it's great from the cycling team. This is the British team at Tour de France, yes?
It like the national team, yeah, that went like that would do
The
all of
national
the
team. Okay,
tours
not the
and the
individual.
Olympics. Yeah, but they would do Olympics, they would do all of those. So yeah, they
And
had
it's
one.
get 1% better a day. Well, what an interesting
Yeah,
idea.
yeah,
It's not too intimidating. So if we want to draw this great first podcast to a close, it's been a great conversation, but I think we can end with some key takeaways, Scott, if that works for you.
yeah,
Um,
bring it.
because if I'm watching this and I'm watching Scott and Clint because I have a business that I'm running and I want to grow that business, what does all of this growth mindset focus have to do with actually growing your business, and what are the takeaways to making the link? I'll go first with one, and we can exchange a few, and we can
Okay.
wrap. Was listening to a book recently about well, they mentioned the company BlackBerry. The book, man, I've been reading so many books lately. I'm trying to remember which one this actually came from. I think this is Strength to Strength from Arthur Brooks, who taught at
Great
Harvard
book.
University. Yeah, Arthur Brooks, if you're listening, thank you for writing that great book. And one of the things in the book, he talked about Apple and he talked about BlackBerry, and how BlackBerry, you might all remember, was crushing in the phone area. We all had those tactile cool keyboards. I think this goes like late 2000s, and they had the big market share. And
Yeah.
inside BlackBerry, the CEO was being told, and granted, his company was worth almost $100 billion at that point, and he's being told that he could put a web browser on his phone, and wouldn't that change the world? No, we're sticking to email. Tactile keyboards that everybody's thumb likes. None of this touching the screen business, and forget the web browser. People have their PCs and their Macs for that. Now, sitting in Cupertino, Steve Jobs was hearing from his team that they should be doing phones, and he was resolutely against it. And for 3 years, the hippo, highest paid person's opinion, in the room with Steve Jobs, didn't want to do it. But slowly his team worked on him, and then they finally decided to launch iPhone. And thank goodness Steve Jobs did. Today it's nearly half of Apple's business. And Apple would not be the force they are today without making phones. And other decisions that Jobs made during that time. The point of it is here is somebody had to dare. Somebody had to dare to fail. And Apple did fail quite a few times with their iPhones. You might remember the iPhone 4 with the faulty antenna, and it was a battle between the engineers who said it wouldn't work and Mr. Ivy, who basically had all power at Apple to design anything he wanted because Steve Jobs loved his aesthetics. And the engineers were actually right that the pretty aesthetics of the iPhone 4 monkeyed with the reception on the antenna, and they had a big problem.
Yeah.
But they dared and they challenged and they learned from that, and they fixed their problem with the antenna, and they fixed a lot of other electronic problems. There's a big CPU in our phones. I don't think we appreciate how much is really going on underneath that screen. Just one example, I think. Dare boldly, take the risk, know you're going to fail. BlackBerry didn't, and they are on the ash heap of history. And Apple did, and we know that right now they are the most valuable company in the world, due in large measure to the iPhone. So that's one example from me, Scott. Any other takeaways for you of applying this to a business?
Yeah, I think just in general, like when you say that, I think there are a lot of companies, if they've been around for a while, they tend to not understand the difference between what's your core business model and what are traditions in the company. And that line becomes really blurred. And I've been with some companies where, people say, well, we've just always done it this way. And if, it reminded me of your Palm Pilot, or like the BlackBerry, it's like, but this is how it is. And it's like, but does it really have to be? And there are some things that, like, at the core, Apple was innovation. And that's kind of that key. But like tradition is like, no, we need to stay like with this and the music or whatever. And like people challenge that. And so I think many people in leadership, or as they're growing in leadership, they need to understand what's tradition, what's core business, and then how do we separate and then grow by leaning into the core business or even adapting new pieces. So I think that's critical in growth at any company level.
Tradition versus core business. If you're a business executive listening to this and you're wondering how you can get your company into growth mode and you're stagnated right now, I think what Scott just said is gold. What's a tradition and what's a core business?
Yeah.
I challenge you to think about that, and to be
That's a
humble
hard
about
one.
and to be humble about the answers. That's very tough, but it's very, very good. That's why it's so good. One other thing I'll add here as a takeaway is not to rest in confident seasons, but to plan with humility. When the wind's at your back, it's really easy to rest. And I remember when the accolades were coming in year two and we were doing very well, my CEO advisor, Mauro Schneidman, pulled me aside and said, "You are not paying attention to what might be around the corner." And I remember it was like a punch to my gut at the time. I'm like, dude, we're winning. And it's like, I just nodded his head even more. He's like, you're missing the whole point. I promise you, something unpleasant is around the corner and it will be coming in your direction. And you don't know what it is yet. But I would be spending your time now rather than celebrating. I would be spending your time planning humbly about what the next challenges can be and what risks you're willing to take to ensure that you're ready for the future. And those became haunting words about a year or two later. But right now, I look at them with fondness. And what a smart thing for my CEO coach to say. And I pass that wisdom along. If you're in life and you're winning right now, what's around your corner? And I'm not trying to be a buzzkill here. This is about growth. This is a conversation about growth, not a conversation about learning to have parties and learning to celebrate. I think that comes rather naturally to human beings when things go well. We all kind of know how to do that, don't we? But learning how to grow and to deal with loss or to deal with struggle is not innate to most people's comfort level when they react. And that was the core message from him. Anything else on your mind, Scott, as we're wrapping?
Well, I think you reminded me of, when you're in leadership positions, and they vary, depending on companies, but I remember you saying, like, oftentimes you need to be a lonely warrior. And it's like,
oh, you're going to discourage everybody from being a CEO.
But I mean, it's like that awareness that it's like, no, I took this role on, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to bear that, responsibility, so that others can really thrive and grow and fail fast. But just to be able to say, I can be a worrier, but I can also be a warrior at the same time. But it all has to do with, yes, this is how we're going to do it. And I think understanding what we talked about today really gives distinguishes leaders from those who take time to think about what's happening, take time to assess, and not rest on their laurels, look for continuous improvement, see what's, tradition versus core business, and always finding that little competitive edge, because guaranteed someone else is going to be doing it. And so if not you, then, someone else will gladly step into that role. So I think it's just one of those, it's like, be bold, be daring, as you said before, but, learn from failure with grace, but grow from that. And I would also say, in just like last words, is failure is it's okay to not be great all the time. And we have to give ourselves a little bit of grace so that we can have the energy to get up the next day and go do this. And whatever that task is. And just realize, okay, I failed. Now I'm going to move on and be successful with the next thought that I have.
Well, to fail is to be human, and to have a human experience is to endure failure from time to time. It's part and parcel of what we get as human beings. And my last thought here as a takeaway would be to show gratitude for the totality of the experience.
Nice.
If you're grateful for your life, you got to be grateful for everything. Stephen Colbert recently talked about this, he had family members die in a plane crash years ago, and how he has even come psychologically to the place to be grateful for everything that happens. Everything that happens, because everything that happens is a part of his human life experience that is enabling him to grow. I'm not sure I'd be as enlightened as Steve Colbert on that one, but it definitely made me think that he was expressing gratitude for everything, including that. But the broader point here is, be grateful for the totality of your life. It's a miracle to be alive. You have like a 1 in trillion chance of being born with the genes that you have, that you're even alive right now as Scott Halverson and me as Clint. It's because we have the memories of our ancestors encoded into our DNA. What chance was that they were all going to turn out the way that they did in you and in me? Very low. So we can be grateful that we are blessed to be the people that we are in a life on this earth having a human experience, and to understand that human experience has attendant struggle, and to prepare ourselves to be in a good position to deal with failure when it happens, and to grow. Because if you grow and then you win, then you are a grown person who has confidence, which is practically an enlightened state. But it's hard to get there without the failure. So wow, Scott, this is our first one. We'd love to see your comments about what we had to say, wherever you're seeing this across our channels, and to let us know if you'd like to see some more, because we'd like to share some of our thinking about growth as it relates not just to business and the mechanics of dollars and cents, but growth in our own selves as becoming better people and becoming better leaders and becoming the type of humans that ought to be leading companies that are trying to figure out growth in numbers. So anything else you want to add before we call it a wrap, Scott?
I don't know about you. I had a great time, and I'm grateful that you are part of my life's experience, and I look forward to more of these. So for those who are listening, I hope you are brave every day and you embrace whatever opportunity the day brings and make the most out of it. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for tuning in. That's well said, and we'll leave it there. Clint McKinley in LA, Scott Halverson from in New York. You are in New York, yes. And we bid you farewell for now. We look forward to seeing you on a future podcast. Thanks, everybody.
We'll see you.